Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mindfuel, where we are making mental fitness accessible to endurance athletes so you can train your brain as consciously as you train your body. Today, we're diving into confidence and how to not let that critical voice in our heads stop us from doing things that we want to do. Joining us for this discussion is my friend Jess Golding. Jess, welcome to Mindfuel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Really, really excited to chat through all things confidence with you today. But before we dive into that, we do start every episode here by asking our guests to introduce themselves, not by telling us what you do, because I think that often gets tied up in identity and we just spend too much time focusing on that. So I want to know, who are you? How would your friends, your family, your partner describe you?
It's a very difficult question because I do think we tend to kind of project out into the world what we think other people would like to hear. I guess like the way that I would like to introduce myself is, first of all, just kind of announcing what I kind of say to the world, which is that I am an ultra cyclist, I am an adventurer, and I am a writer. But definitely that's not how my friends would describe me. I think from a kind of friend angle, they would say I'm someone that spends most of my time in lycra or sports attire, and the other
You're in
half,
good company here, I think.
excellent, good to hear it, and the other half in sequin dresses. And there is no in between, nothing in between, just those two extremes. That's who they think I am. And then I think diving a little bit deeper in terms of who I see myself as, because I think that's a really interesting way to think about things. I definitely still see myself as that shy kid in school who's afraid to put her hand up in class, and still struggle a lot with self-confidence and self-belief on a daily basis. Big spectrum between those two different things, right? Like how I present myself to the world and how people kind of perceive me, and then how I perceive myself.
Very interesting. Hopefully we'll get into that a little bit more in our conversation. I'm also a little bit sad that we don't see sequins on you
I'm
today,
so sorry.
but lovely on-brand yellow, so thanks for that. You started to touch on this with the lycra and ultra cyclist comments, but tell us a little bit more in depth about your relationship to sport.
So where do I begin? I mean, growing up, I was never particularly sporty, believe it or not. I kind of dabbled in netball here and there. I was on a dragon boat team when I lived overseas,
Oh, cool.
but never really considered myself like an athlete, right? It was just more of a social thing. And it really has only been in the past 4 or 5 years or so where it has become such a huge part of my life. And cycling in particular, that's kind of my love and my forte. I picked that up when I decided that I wanted to start doing triathlon for the first time. I used to run a little bit. I mean, I did swimming lessons in school, but I didn't own a bike and I'd never cycled, kind of
Wow.
more than just round my hometown when I was much younger. So bought a bike to get into cycling to start triathlon, and then very quickly realized that I absolutely loved the bike. I loved being on the bike. I loved how it made me feel. I loved what it could do for me, and quickly dropped the swimming and running side of things, and then became just a pure kind of cyclist. And what that looks like, I guess, my journey since then is I've discovered like how much of a lifestyle cycling can be. It's not just a sport to me. It really is like such a fundamental part of my life, and particularly long distance cycling. So very quickly, I kind of progressed the distances that I was covering, kind of hitting my first 200K within the first year, quickly moving to 3K, signing up for my first 1000K ultra. And then last year completed my biggest event yet, which was a 4,000 kilometer cycle from the north of Italy to
Wow.
beyond the Arctic Circle and all the way to kind of Nordkap, which if you'd have asked Jess 5 years ago that, whether she thought that she could do that, she would absolutely say no. And I think that's a really great stepping stone into, why obviously confidence is an integral part of achieving in endurance sports.
Totally. I was reflecting before our conversation, Jess, that I think it was just about exactly 1 year ago now that we were introduced by a mutual friend, as part of kind of talking to you and then understanding that you are the author of a Substack, which is already published on the Mindfuel website as a recommendation. It's called Beyond the Finish Line. So we'll link it in our notes so everyone can go check it out. Jess says this is where she shares the messy and human side of cycling and adventure. But it's really become quite inspirational to me because it's written with so much vulnerability and authenticity, but also a lot of inspiration of, wow, what is possible? I didn't even know about some of these races and rides that existed. and your just honesty, how raw you are about how you cope with what you call your over anxious brain, um, and that you're someone who berates yourself for, quote, perceived flaws and shortcomings, but keeps showing up anyway. I think this has just spoken to me so much because A, I identify with a lot of it. I think probably much of our audience does, but B, I'm then kind of in awe that you go off and do these really big and really hard things anyway. As we've said, I don't think there's probably anyone better than you, perhaps, to talk about confidence today. And I actually think where I'd like to start that conversation is understanding what that unhelpful voice that berates you kind of sounds like and what does it say? And if you've spoken to other friends or other athletes about this, what do you think is kind of similar or different, and how might the audience relate to what's going on up here?
Yeah, I imagine what I'm going to say is not going to be a surprise to anybody, right? And I think that was exactly the reason as to why I started sharing my experiences and kind of writing online about these things. The voice tends to say, you're not good enough in various different forms. And I think kind of most people that experience this, if not everybody, will say very similar things. It tends to kind of manifest as, like, you're not strong enough, you're not fast enough, everyone else finds this easier than you don't belong here, everyone's judging you, everyone's looking at you. And even though I know these things probably aren't true, they're definitely not true, guys, they're definitely not true. I know they're not true, but it's that voice is so strong. And I think it tends to be a very kind of natural thing, especially when you start to push your limits, and especially when you get into a competitive kind of space in sports where you are comparing yourself to lots of other people. It just becomes a little bit harder to manage, right?
Yeah, I feel that. I mean, I think I've been pretty open with my own journey and various guises with Mindfuel of really struggling to separate that voice and recognizing that it is part of me, but it isn't necessarily right. And sometimes actually it is. Maybe there's a time when it says, hey, you might not be strong enough in this moment to do this thing, and you need to back off because that's the healthiest option for your body. Great time to listen to it. But often I have found that it stopped me or pushed me inward and not allowed me to kind of like open up and share my gifts with the world or to pursue the things I really want to. How have you found that balance of like recognizing when it's truly blocking you, that voice, when I say it, it's truly blocking you from something that you can and you should do versus maybe actually helping you and recognizing this is not a good idea at this time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think like a really hard question to answer as well, right? And it's like a constant kind of learning curve to figure that out. I think the way I like to approach it is thinking through the lens of fear and excitement, being two ends of a similar kind of spectrum. And I think that fear and that excitement is a lot of what prompts those thoughts, right? It's when I get really excited about something or really fearful about something because I want to do well, I want to achieve, I want to do this thing. And that is the thing that's kind of prompting that voice to kind of show up. And it's really hard to know sometimes whether what you're thinking about going for or thinking about what your goal is, whether it is an excitement that is bubbling under the surface, or whether it is a genuine fear. And obviously it can be both. But I think the way I try and understand which one it is the most is by visualizing, I guess, me finishing or completing or, achieving whatever this thing is that I'm doubting whether I can do, and trying to picture how do I feel in that moment, right? So especially when thinking about whether I should sign up for this 4,000-kilometer race. I was like, that's, 4 times the distance I've ever cycled before. And I had the worst time on that. I suffered from awful saddle sores, like sleep deprivation. Obviously, looking back, it was fantastic. At the time, horrible.
Amazing what our brains can block
I
out
know,
after
it's
the
like
fact.
repress all of those memories. But it was the excitement outweighed the fear. And when I thought about, because the finish line was at the kind of globe monument at Nordkap, and my visualization was me standing on that platform with that globe behind me, having just completed the
Oh,
biggest thing I've
cool.
ever done. And that filled me with excitement, not dread, not fear. So that's why I knew that this is something I genuinely want to do and something I should push through and should like squash all of those fears and doubts and insecurities because I want to have that feeling at the end. Comparing that to something like, should I go on a roller coaster tomorrow? No, I'm going to hate that. I absolutely am going to hate that. I don't want to do it. That's not excitement. That's just pure fear. So,
I like this a lot because I think it's that often the brain body like fighting. And when you can really focus on the feeling, our bodies tend to be the smartest. They'll tell us and guide us correctly if we don't allow the head to overrule. So
1000%.
that's a really
1000%.
sage advice. You, as I said at the beginning, you write so eloquently about a lot of this and very inspirationally. So, and you've been pretty open in your Substack about the power of writing for you. So, I'd love to also just hear a bit more about that and how it's supported you putting out into the world, which can be a very scary thing, being that vulnerable. And you are very, I think, open and honest. So, why has that been important and how has that supported you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I cast my mind back to when I, opened the Substack to start with, and kind of the kind of main reasoning behind it, it really was around wanting to make other people who perhaps had similar thoughts and similar like self-doubt and insecurities understand that they weren't on their own,
Mm.
right? For so much of my early cycling life, I, would ride alongside other people in cycling clubs or in my triathlon club. I'd see other people doing similar races. And the thing that just constantly went through my head was, does no one else find this hard? Like it
Mm.
was the constant question. We'd be like battling up hills and I'd be, just hyperventilating, like trying to get more oxygen in, really struggling. And then we get to the top and everyone's just like cruising as though it's been absolutely fine. I was like, am I just like incredibly
No, it is not just you. I know this from experience too.
all I wanted in so many of those situations was for somebody else to just put their hand up and say, hey, I found that hard. Anyone else? And it just never
Yeah.
came in so many
Wow.
different scenarios and situations I was in. I was constantly looking around, wanting somebody to meet my eye and go, yeah, me too. And no one ever did. And I couldn't figure out whether it was because people were not willing to show their vulnerabilities and therefore just keeping it inside and putting on a brave
Mm.
face and putting on a mask, or whether they genuinely just didn't find it hard and I was just the outlier here and the anomaly. So that's why I wanted to kind of put my hand up, I guess, in my own little corner of the internet and say, guys, this is hard. I'm finding it hard. I find things hard all the time and I'm doing them anyway. And you can too, right? So that's
Yes.
kind of the reasoning behind it.
And you've had a really good reception to that too. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of engagement you've gotten? And we're so aligned, part of the purpose of Mindfuel is to bring these conversations forward. So thank you for being here today to share that and also kind of being a partner to Mindfuel. But yeah, I would love to hear what kind of reception you've had.
So one thing I like to write a lot about is race recap. So whenever I have completed or taken part in an ultra event, I'll kind of sit down afterwards and really just kind of pour my heart onto onto the page or onto the screen. Part of that is it's kind of processing for myself. You feel a lot of things during these events. You really are kind of pushed to your rawest self and made to kind of overcome some kind of really deep demons, I guess. So a lot of that is just me processing things, but also just sharing that process and the thoughts that I had during. And it's honestly been so overwhelming, the number of people that have, either interacted with these posts or reached out to me personally and said, same, me too, right? I could have written those exact words. And that is what I wanted to read from other people, where
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, me too. So it's nice to be able to be the one to kind of lead those conversations and lead the charge in that so that other people feel seen and heard and
Yes.
understood and know that if they find it hard too, that's okay. They can keep going. Like,
Yeah,
don't quit, right? Don't give
totally.
up just because you find it hard.
Yeah, it's not bad or taboo that it's hard. Actually, endurance sport has always been hard, and it's part of the attraction of doing it. And taking away any of that stigma around saying it's hard, I think, is the healthiest thing that we can all do.
I think it's
So,
so
Jess, as
cool.
you've been on this journey of boosting your confidence or at least quieting that voice in your head, even if it's still there, what would you say is the most important ritual, or if you have a few, very open to hearing more than one, that you've developed to keep that confidence up and continue to do the hard things you want to try?
Don't know if I can offer some kind of useful ritual. I think for me, what's helpful is, well, first of all, like continuing to share these things, right? And make sure that like I am being honest and vulnerable about my own like shortcomings and
Yeah.
vulnerabilities. And that keeps me honest to myself. And also just thinking back to past experiences. I think we so easily, or we're so quick to forget like past achievements. We don't really carry those learnings forward very often. You know, I could have cycled these massive distances and done these solo kind of rides across continents. And here I am today thinking, oh, I feel a bit nervous about that 200K next week. You know, like we completely just forget any
Yeah.
kind of past things that we've done. So I think, first of all, just kind of taking a step back, creating that space to reflect on our past achievements. And trusting ourselves, right?
Yes.
Trusting that you can do it. You've literally proven yourself like time and time and time again, and just have that little bit of faith, a little bit more faith
Yeah.
in your ability, you know, to do hard things.
Absolutely. It's that evidence piece, I think, is always really important. And as you said, then trusting it. And sometimes I also stop and question, well, what if I try and I don't get to the end? What's the worst here? And obviously, when we're talking about ultra cycling in the middle of nature, perhaps on your own, we need to be prepared for safety. And I'm not trying to discount that element of it, but actually trying and not necessarily reaching the end doesn't mean we haven't achieved goals of pushing ourselves, having an adventure. So maybe it also goes to one of the topics we talk about on Mindfuel around goal setting and making sure that we have multiple goals and it's not just the be all end all, I did this big thing in this amount of time.
I think that's honestly so important, and a lesson that I'm still learning. Like it's been a journey. I think when I initially got into ultra distance, it became so much around constantly pushing boundaries, like what's next, what's next. And that was the question that you'd hear so often, right? Coming
Mm,
back after a big event, you'd meet up with friends or whatever, and the first question is, so what's next? And you feel like there's this expectation of you
yeah.
to constantly have to reach the next height, and it gets tiring and it gets exhausting. And there's also a risk there, which I think is actually quite dangerous in this world, which is you start to tie your identity to these
Yes.
big challenges. It's like, if I'm not an endurance athlete, who am I?
Yeah.
And I think it's so
Yeah.
easy to forget those things, which is why this year I've really tried to kind of step back and not have a big, huge milestone challenge to achieve. I've tried to kind of refine the joy in cycling, you know, shorter distances,
Yeah.
more bike
Nice.
packing, like adventuring, and just reclaiming like who I am without a big challenge on the horizon. And I think that's, yeah, such an important lesson to learn.
It is. The tying up of identity and all of this is very easy. It's very common. I think there's so many pressures in society that push us that way, but it can become very dangerous and we lose the joy in the process. For me,
Yeah.
that's the saddest part is that then it isn't so fun often because it's just about achievement. Like,
Yeah.
no, this is about being on your bike or on your feet or whatever your discipline of choice is. So, kind of a funny question to be asking now off the back of that answer, but what are you most excited about doing in the next 12 months? And it doesn't have to be big and audacious, but something that maybe you in the past or even now still have a little bit of the scared feeling or a little bit of lack of confidence. And how are you navigating that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll be honest and say that I don't have like a huge cycling related goal, right, for next year. There's definitely a little seed that's been planted recently
Okay.
around, could I cycle around the world? But
Well,
that's you heard it here first.
we'll be having you back along that adventure.
But you know, I'd love to do a big adventure like that, which is not like distance oriented or time oriented or race oriented, just like a big, cool adventure,
Yeah.
being on my bike, doing things. Nothing set in stone for that yet. But what I did want to touch on again, going back to that identity piece and like how you can take a lot of these learnings from endurance sport and building confidence into other aspects of your life is there's been a huge number of life changes that I've made recently. I was made redundant from my job, and instead of deciding to dive back into the 9 to 5, I've actually decided, you know what, I want to start building a life on my own terms, going self-employed, managing my time and energy a little bit more, hopefully getting more involved in bringing cycling to more women. And that
Awesome.
was a decision and a goal that, again, Jess 5 years ago never would have taken, because she would have thought, but what if this? I'm going to fail at that. I can't do
Mhm.
this. And through my journey with cycling and endurance sports and achieving these things, again, going back to the evidence piece, I actually trust myself now. I trust that, there is
That's
this big
huge.
unknown in front of me, but I trust that I'm going
Oh,
to get
thank
through
you.
it and make it out to the other side. And I'm really excited about that.
As you should be. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I guess the other big goal, which is terrifying to say out loud, but I'm actually hoping to write my first book. Whoa, which has
No
been a
small
dream of
feat.
mine since I was a child. So that's the huge kind of goal, I guess I've bitten off for next year. Yeah.
Well,
Thanks
congratulations.
very much.
Very inspirational, and I'll be the first to buy the book, no doubt. Or one of the first. I might have to be in line already. Jess, if you could leave us with one succinct thought on confidence today, what would it be?
Succinct is not my forte.
That's okay.
However,
One final thought I'll rephrase for you.
I think the message that I want to scream from the rooftops is just like, never forget how wildly capable you are. You can do hard things. All these people around you that you see doing huge feats of endurance, like, they're not special. They are no different from you. People find it hard. I find it hard. They find it hard. They do it anyway. You can do it too.
Love it. Thank you so much, Jess. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you, learn more, and continue to be inspired by you?
But so obviously my Substack, Beyond the Finish Line, I publish weekly articles there, whether it's kind of recaps on recent adventures, how-to guides, or just random personal musings of things that are going on in my head. Also on Instagram at In the Jesky, I'm quite active on there, so probably the best place to reach me. Just shoot me a DM if you have any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much. We'll put, as we do with all of our guests, Jess's contact details on the website in the experts section, as well as post some of the links in the notes of this episode. And as always, again, if this resonated with you, please like the video, subscribe to our channel. And if you have any follow-up comments or questions, you can post them directly on this episode or send them to us on email at connect@mindfuel.fit. If you haven't already, please check out the other videos on our channel and loads more resources to support you on your mental fitness journey on our website, mindfuel.fit, and you can subscribe to our mailing list there as well. Jess, thank you again so much, and hopefully we'll be having you back to hear about more of your adventures. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Happy and
Thank
healthy
you very much.
training.
Bye.